Jake had seen a lot of strange things on his ranch, but nothing prepared him for the sight that greeted him that morning. The hoof prints in the dirt weren't unusual. His horses roamed freely in their enclosures. But the small footprints alongside them? That was a different story. As he stepped closer, his gut twisted. The saddle on Midnight, his prized black mare, was slightly askew. Daisy, his other horse, looked restless, her tail flicking anxiously. He reached out and ran a hand over Midnight's coat, damp with sweat. Someone had ridden them. And it wasn't him. A quick survey of his property confirmed his growing suspicion. The gate to the paddock, which he always kept locked, was unlatched. A few brushes lay scattered near the stable door, and, his eyes narrowed, one of his riding helmets was lying upside down in the dirt. Someone had trespassed onto his land, used his horses, and then left without a trace. His mind raced through possibilities. Had some teenagers dared each other to sneak in for a ride? No, they wouldn't have had the nerve. Then he remembered something. Last week, his neighbor Karen had made an offhand comment at the mailbox. "Oh, my kids just love your horses. It's such a shame they don't get to ride them." At the time, he had shrugged it off. Now, a sick realization settled in his gut. Pulling out his phone, he opened the neighborhood Facebook group, where all local gossip festered. It took less than a minute to find Karen's latest post, a grainy picture of her 2 kids grinning atop his horses. His horses. The caption made his blood boil. Such a beautiful morning for a little horseback adventure. The kids had a blast riding today. So lucky to have this experience right in our backyard. The comments were even worse. People were congratulating her, praising her for giving her children such a wholesome childhood memory. Someone even asked, "Did you book a riding lesson?" Karen's response was casual, almost smug. "Oh no, the horses were right there, and kids need to explore, right?" Jake saw red. She didn't just let her kids trespass. She was bragging about it. He clenched his jaw, took a deep breath, and tried to think rationally. Marching over to Karen's house and blowing up at her wouldn't get him anywhere. She was the kind of person who always played the victim. If he so much as raised his voice, she'd twist the story into him, harassing a mother. No, he needed to hit her where it hurt. A slow smile spread across his face as an idea formed. If she wanted to pretend her kids had a riding lesson, then a riding lesson she would get. That afternoon, he sat at his desk, drafting an invoice on his laptop. At the top, in bold professional font, he typed, "Equestrian riding lesson payment due upon receipt." He carefully listed the charges: horse rental fee, instructor fee, stable maintenance, equipment usage. Grand total, $500. He even added a cheerful note at the bottom. "Thank you for supporting small local businesses." With a sense of satisfaction, he printed it out, folded it neatly, and strolled over to Karen's house. He slipped the bill into her mailbox and walked away, whistling. The next morning, the storm hit. Karen came marching across his property, her face red with fury, the invoice crumpled in her fist. "What is this?" she demanded, shoving the paper toward him like it was a court summons. Jake barely glanced at it. "Looks like a bill." Her mouth opened and closed, her usual entitlement faltering for just a second before she found her voice again. "You can't charge me for this. My kids were just having fun. What, you expect a mother to pay for fresh air now?" He folded his arms, leveling her with a steady gaze. "No, Karen. I expect a mother to pay for using my horses like a personal amusement park without permission." She scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh please. They're horses. They don't mind. And besides, you weren't even using them at the time. It's not like we took anything from you." Jake took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Karen, you let your kids trespass on my land, use my animals without my consent, and now you're acting like you did nothing wrong? These aren't machines. They're living, breathing animals. Do you even know how dangerous it is for an untrained rider to hop on a horse?" Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Nothing happened. Not this time, Jake shot back. But what if your kids had fallen? What if they spooked the horses and got kicked? You'd be the first one threatening to sue me. Her expression flickered, just for a moment, before she masked it with another exasperated sigh. Well, that didn't happen. And I'm not paying this ridiculous bill. Jake shrugged. Then I'll take it to the HOA. Pretty sure they won't be thrilled about someone using private property without permission. Karen's face twisted. She knew exactly what that meant. The HOA already had enough rules about property lines and liability. If they got wind of this, they'd hit her with fines she couldn't argue her way out of. Still, she wasn't ready to back down. Fine, she snapped. I'll just take it up with them myself. Let's see what they have to say about you trying to shake down a mother for money. Jake watched her storm off, knowing she was walking into a battle she couldn't win. He had the evidence, the bill, and the patience to let her dig her own grave. One way or another, she was going to learn that writing lessons, especially unauthorized ones, weren't free. The storm arrived sooner than Jake expected. By noon, Karen had already launched her counterattack. It started with an aggressive Facebook post, dripping with self-righteous fury. Unbelievable, she wrote. Some people in this neighborhood think they can just charge hard-working parents ridiculous fees for letting their kids experience the simple joy of nature. Since when do we have to pay to be part of our own community? Within minutes, the comments flooded in. Some sympathized, parroting her outrage, while others were more skeptical. One person asked, "Wait, did you actually book a riding lesson, or did your kids just take the horses without permission?" Karen conveniently ignored that question. Jake wasn't surprised. He had seen enough of Karen's antics over the years to know her playbook by heart. She would spin the story, twist the facts, and play the victim until enough people sided with her. But this time, she had underestimated him. He didn't need to argue. He had proof. Less than an hour after her post, Jake received an email from the HOA, the subject line reading, "Urgent. Inquiry regarding unauthorized business activity." He let out a dry chuckle. Karen had wasted no time. She had gone straight to the HOA, framing him as some shady businessman trying to scam neighbors out of money. He clicked on the email, scanning the predictable accusations. "We have received a complaint from a resident regarding the unauthorized operation of a horseback riding business on your property. Please provide clarification on whether you are charging community members for services and whether these activities comply with HOA regulations." Jake sighed. He had no interest in HOA politics, but if Karen wanted to drag him into this, he was more than happy to set the record straight. He responded immediately, keeping his email short and professional. He explained that he was not running a business, but rather billing an individual for unauthorized use of his animals and property. To drive the point home, he attached a few select screenshots. Karen's Facebook post boasting about her kids' wonderful equestrian adventure, and the security footage that clearly showed them sneaking into his paddock. He ended the email with a polite but firm note. "I trust the HOA will consider the implications of allowing residents to trespass and use private property without consent. Looking forward to your guidance on this matter." An hour later, his phone rang. It was a number he recognized. The HOA board president, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, who had little patience for neighborhood drama. "Jake," she said without preamble, "I reviewed the footage. We're going to need to have a meeting." Jake smirked. "I figured." The meeting was set for the following evening at the community center. Karen, true to form, arrived early and fuming. She had brought a printed copy of her own complaint, which she waved around like a legal document. "This is harassment," she huffed, planting herself in a chair. "My kids did nothing wrong, and now I'm being billed like I stole something. This is extortion, plain and simple." Linda raised an eyebrow. "Karen, the footage shows your children entering a private property and riding animals that don't belong to them. How exactly do you justify that?" Karen's expression flickered with uncertainty before she doubled down. Jake has horses. He never said we couldn't use them. How was I supposed to know it was a problem? Jake fought the urge to laugh. Maybe the locked gate was a clue? Karen shot him a glare. They're just kids. They weren't hurting anyone. Linda sighed, already looking exhausted. Karen, this is not about just kids. This is a liability issue. If something had happened, who would have been responsible? Jake? Would you have sued him if your kids fell? Karen opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. Jake leaned forward, arms crossed. I sent you a bill because you used my property and my animals like a service without permission. If you refuse to pay, that's fine, but let's not pretend you're the victim here. Karen scoffed, but she had lost momentum. The other HOA members, most of whom had remained silent, were watching her with thinly veiled annoyance. One of them finally spoke up. Look, this is pretty straightforward. Karen, your kids trespassed. You bragged about it. And now you're mad that there are consequences. We can't force you to pay the bill, but the HOA can fine you for violating community property rules. Karen's face went pale. Fine me? Are you serious? Linda folded her hands. Very. You knowingly entered private property and put animals at risk. That's a clear violation. And I'll be honest, if Jake wanted to press charges, he'd have a case. Karen turned back to Jake, her voice shrill. You wouldn't. Jake shrugged. I don't want to. But I also don't want this happening again. For a long moment, Karen sat in stunned silence. Then, her expression twisted into something between disbelief and fury. This is ridiculous, she muttered, shoving her papers into her bag. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. Linda tapped a pen against the table. You don't. But the fine will be mailed to your house. Karen stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Jake exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Well, that went about as well as I expected. Linda offered him a wry smile. Welcome to HOA politics. The next morning, Jake woke up to find that Karen had deleted her Facebook post. The comments, which had originally been full of sympathy, had turned against her overnight. Apparently, the security footage had made the rounds, and people weren't as eager to defend her once they saw the truth. But Karen wasn't one to accept defeat quietly. That afternoon, Jake spotted her from his window, talking to a small group of neighbors, her hands waving animatedly. He didn't need to hear the conversation to know she was trying to spin the story again. He shook his head and smiled. Let her talk. The facts were already out there. She could complain all she wanted, but the HOA fine wasn't going anywhere, and neither was his bill. Whether she liked it or not, she had just learned a very expensive lesson. Jake had expected Karen to stay quiet after the HOA fine, maybe lick her wounds and move on, but he had underestimated her ability to hold a grudge. The very next morning, he noticed something odd while checking his security cameras. Karen was standing just outside his property, peering toward the paddock with her phone in hand. A minute later, she was talking to someone on a call, gesturing dramatically. That wasn't a good sign. Sure enough, within an hour, a sheriff's car pulled up to his front gate. Jake sighed, already exhausted before the conversation even began. The deputy stepped out, looking vaguely apologetic as he tipped his hat. Afternoon, Mr. Callahan. Got a report about some, unauthorized animal business going on here. Jake almost laughed. Karen wasn't even trying to be creative anymore. Let me guess, he said, crossing his arms. Karen. The deputy sighed, glancing down at his notepad. She claims you're running a commercial riding school without a license and overcharging residents for lessons. Jake shook his head, chuckling. You're kidding. Wish I was, the deputy muttered. I know this is nonsense, but I still gotta follow up. Without another word, Jake pulled out his phone, scrolled to the security footage, and hit play. The video showed Karen's kids sneaking onto his property, climbing the fence, and mounting his horses. Then he opened the email thread with the HOA, showing their official decision to fine Karen for trespassing. Finally, he pulled up his invoice, the so-called riding school charge Karen was ranting about. The deputy scanned through it all, nodding slowly. "Well," he said finally, rubbing his chin, "this is about as cut and dry as it gets. I'll have a chat with her, let her know to stop wasting our time." Jake watched as the deputy drove over to Karen's house, where she stood waiting with an expectant smirk. The smirk didn't last long. As soon as the deputy started talking, her expression shifted from smug to irritated, then finally to outright fury. Her arms flailed, her voice growing louder, though Jake couldn't hear the words from this distance. Eventually, the deputy gave her a curt nod, turned on his heel, and left. Karen stood frozen on her porch, glaring daggers across the street at Jake's property. An hour later, a new Facebook post appeared. "Some people in this community are just so petty. Imagine calling the police over kids enjoying some fresh air and time with animals. It's really sad when people care more about money than kindness." Jake had to admire her commitment to delusion. She had completely ignored the fact that she had called the police and somehow made herself the victim again. The comments section, however, was less forgiving this time. People had seen the footage. They knew the real story. A few neighbors even replied, sarcastically offering to come borrow Karen's car since she apparently believed in free community sharing. Despite her public embarrassment, Karen still wasn't done. The next day, Jake spotted her kids near the fence again, eyeing the horses. He marched outside before they could try anything. The moment they saw him, they scurried off. That night, he made a decision. If Karen wasn't going to take the lesson seriously, he was going to make sure it stuck. The next morning, he made a few calls. By noon, a professional equestrian trainer had arrived at his property, setting up signs that read, "Private horseback riding lessons, now accepting students." It was a joke at first, a petty little dig at Karen, but to Jake's surprise, within a few hours, neighbors started reaching out. Apparently, real riding lessons were something people actually wanted. By the end of the week, he had his first few students. Kids and even a few adults from the neighborhood signed up for actual lessons, paying real money. It turned out to be a decent side hustle, one that he had never even considered before Karen's antics. The best part? The first person to inquire about prices was none other than Karen's husband, who seemed blissfully unaware of the war his wife had been waging. "My daughter loves horses," he said cheerfully when he stopped by. "She and her brother rode a couple weeks ago, and now they won't stop talking about it." Jake smiled. "Oh, I know." The irony was too much. He gave the man a discounted price, just to see what would happen. 2 days later, Karen showed up at his door, seething. "You think you're funny, don't you?" she snapped. Jake leaned casually against the doorframe. "I try." She shoved an envelope at him. Inside was the exact amount her husband had paid for the lessons. "There. You happy? Now can you let this whole stupid thing go?" Jake tucked the envelope into his pocket with a smirk. "Sure, Karen. We're good." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "And just so you know, my kids didn't even like the horses that much. They said your lessons were boring." Jake nodded, barely suppressing his grin. "Good to know." As she stomped off, he couldn't help but appreciate the poetic justice. She had fought him every step of the way, but in the end she had literally paid the price. Better yet, she had inadvertently helped him start a new business. The best part? Every time Karen drove past his ranch and saw happy students trotting along the trails, she had to be reminded that her own tantrum had made it happen. Jake had won. And Karen? She had finally learned that nothing in life, especially horseback riding, came for free.